I was in shock, right? I'm still pinching myself.
It's a very fun feeling. It's a very cool feeling.
We promised you a lot of fun tonight. Let me get those attention. Everyone? Because this deserves everyone's attention. Our honorary Grand Marshal is somebody who went through the trenches for years so that you all could enjoy the life you do today. We know there's a long way to go, but at one point we couldn't even be here celebrating. So please welcome your honorary Grand Marshal.
It's a celebration, but it's also an affirmation.
It really feels like freedom. It really feels like liberation.
Ethics, philosophy of the day.
The Pride Parade was really a celebration of who we are and that we are part of the fabric of this city.
That is what Pride is all about. Acceptance, love, light, and laughter.
This day is going to be our day, and we're going to celebrate no matter what happens.
Recognizing that we have a lot of work left to do, the beat goes on.
I attended my first LGBT organizing event in 1975. I was a sophomore at Rice, and I went to the Texas Gay Conference. And I was lucky enough that in that year, I fell in with a group of older lesbian feminists who essentially adopted me as a mascot and introduced me to LGBT organizing. There were only a handful of university-based LGBT student organizations at the time. I know that the University of Houston had one, I think University of Texas had one, but there weren't very many. And what people have to remember is that we couldn't communicate with each other back then. There was no social media, there were no cell phones. We were all on our own little islands, isolated from each other. And it was a very different time in terms of how we were viewed by society.
What looks like this today started with this in 1969, the Stonewall riots in New York City.
Pride is in June because it commemorates the Stonewall riot, which happened on a hot, muggy night in New York in June.
I'm old enough to know when Stonewall happened in 1969, but I had no idea it happened because we didn't hear about it. We heard about Woodstock and we heard about the landing on the moon, but not about Stonewall, which was sort of the beginning of the modern gay rights movement and now the LGBT rights movement. Violence has always been a problem in this community, as in many communities. But we can't shut ourselves down. We gotta be out there and we gotta fight it. Many of the old timers, and I'm one of the old timers, although I wasn't here at the time, say that the protest for Anita Bryant was really the stepping stone. It was our Stonewall in Houston.
Anita Bryant was a noted pop singer. She also had a big following in faith-based music. She was based in Florida, and for many years she was the celebrity spokesperson for orange juice.
Pick it up, kids. You too, orange birds. My twins love 100% orange juice from Florida any time of day.
When Harvey Milk became a supervisor, a city council person in San Francisco, he passed a non-discrimination ordinance in San Francisco, almost unanimously. Anita Bryant started going around the country and overturning progressive ordinances in Wichita, in Fort Lauderdale, and some other places.
The Houston Pride moment was born out of the Anita Bryant protest. When she came here and she was doing her Save Our Children from the Gays, it wasn't a planned protest. We were literally in the closet at that time and everybody was hiding in their cars. And so they started coming out of their cars and then they figured out they weren't alone. Why is that important? Because Anise Parker was in the audience and she was there that night. She went on to become a Pride Houston Grand Marshal and on to become the mayor of this great city.
And it sounds a little naive now, but we was like, wow, we can do this. We can come together, we can get the attention of people in authority, and we can push back at someone who has attacked us. It was a tremendously empowering moment.
Things like Anita Bryant pushed people to be political and move things for acceptance.
It wasn't always, rainbows and unicorns back in the day. There were bitter political fights and there were divisions. But I think Houston was blessed by having leaders who put the community first. The Ray Hills, the Larry Bonneries, Jack, any number of guys. We had bitter disagreements, but when it came down to it, we wanted to work together for the betterment of the community. The big thing that shifted politics in Houston was Town Meeting 1. Town Meeting 1 led to many of the institutions that still exist that sustain the community, like the Montrose Center or Legacy Healthcare, or a whole range of other organizations that started with a handful of people.
But as the GLBT community was showing their political power, we got hit really bad. We had a referendum on city employment non-discrimination for GLBT people. We lost that, and it sort of devastated the community.
What I learned from other people doing this work every day is it's the understanding that there's something greater than fear. And the greater thing than fear for me is making sure that others can celebrate who they are every day.
I think being out in the South now takes a lot of courage. I cannot fathom the tremendous amount of courage that it took 40 years ago or longer. For people to find the courage to be themselves in an area that is historically not accepting, tremendous courage. And I'm so grateful that they took those rock star, massive first steps so that we can have Pride today.
Many of us who were early activists were shunned by the closeted community who were afraid of losing jobs, family, privilege. But for those of us in the movement, it was about our internal needs for self-respect and standing up for ourselves, but it was also, we learned the lessons of the civil rights movement. We learned the lessons of the importance of nonviolent action and visibility and creating enough of a public presence that the ripple effects could spread into other communities that would never have the opportunity or the ability or the grit to join you.
Pride Houston is important because for so many years, gays were always presented in such derogatory terms and were so despised by the larger community of society. And the first reasons that they called it Pride was that it was our way of saying, we're not going to accept the way you define us, we're going to define ourselves. And then over the years, it turned more into a celebration of who we are. But it was still continually keeping that image out there that we were happy with who we are and we had reason to be proud. And then we got to show off how many allies we had and powerful allies. The fact that we have come through so many things in the past, everything from Anita Bryant to AIDS to the referendums, the community still keeps united and the beat is going on.
So please welcome your honorary Grand Marshal, Brandon Wood.
I grew up in northern part of Lower Michigan, and I was raised in a very conservative religious family. In the end, my family never really was able to accept the fact that this wasn't something that I had chosen and that was a sin. And you can have lots of friends and lots of supportive allies, but somehow at the end of the day, you really want to have your family there for you. That's why I'm especially interested in what's being done for youth, that they don't have to go through what I went through in my childhood, feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of fear.
What I hope that these kids know is that they're not alone, that many have come before them, that they can have beautiful, amazing lives as who they are. They stand on the shoulders of giants, and they can be giants too, and they just have to persist.
In 1968, my oldest brother came out to me and asked me if I was gay, and I wasn't out to myself, so I lied and said no, I wasn't, that I was terribly straight. 2 years later, while I was teaching in Virginia, I saw a show called The Dick Cavett Show, and he had two fellows from the Gay Activist Alliance in New York. And I was so amazed by them because they quote unquote didn't look gay. It really sobered me up. I met someone, and so after that I came out to my brother. And then I also left the school that I was teaching at because in 1970 there was no way that you could be out and teach. I moved here from Washington, D.C., where I had lived for about 7 years. Then in 1979, they had the first parade. And I can remember my heart beating when I was driving down to see it, because I just thought, what's it gonna, this is Texas. There are gonna be gay people driving down for blocks and blocks and blocks. How are people gonna react to this?
Houston is this incredible mixture of neighborhoods that just make up this incredible fabric of what the city is. This Westheimer-Montrose intersection has always been called the heart of the gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender communities, center of the city.
My first house was on Montrose, a couple blocks away from Montrose and Westheimer, and I remember growing up as a kid, the Pride parades. It was a big, fun event. There was lots of color. There was lots of people flooding the neighborhood. And all these spaces you saw as, your restaurants or bars came to life. And I remember kind of my life throughout Pride. Being 5, there with my parents. I don't know what's going on, but there's a lot of people having fun. That excitement was there from the very beginning of my life.
Unlike a lot of places, our parade always had a dress code for participants. Body parts had to be covered. It was a family-friendly parade. It was in a neighborhood.
Having the parade in those days in the middle of Montrose was an incredible statement to us.
All I can think is that there is so much more that I can do. I need to have more courage. I need to do more for our nonprofit community. I need to do more for LGBTQ plus youth. I need to do more for LGBTQ plus elderly people who paved the way for me to sit on that float on June 25th.
At the kickoff, I was standing there with my other finalists, Chip and Maddie, and we were kind of all nervous and holding hands and rooting for each other. And when Kendra got up to announce the winner, she went into this little bit of an introduction of telling the story.
And this one particular candidate came up to me and said, I don't think I'm worthy. I think I'm out of place. I'm not going to win. And they said I got imposter syndrome going on.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I think it's me.
Welcome, imposter, because the winner is Julia!
So I grew up in Florence, Alabama, which is also like the Muscle Shoals area. It has a lot of history of music production. So I grew up around a lot of music. My great-grandmother was the first woman in country and western music to sell 1 million records with a song called I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart. She and I even got to perform once together when I was about 4. Traveling around was, I think, a really unique way to grow up because I had a really lovely sense of community in our small little city, but then I also got to see parts of the world and meet people that I might not have otherwise. I ended up making some of my first LGBTQ friends in high school. Having that sense of community in high school was crucial for me becoming who I am. My family are very conservative Christians that are not accepting. When one of my friends did come out, I was really wrestling with if I could stay friends with him. This is how this all started. I was confiding in one of my teachers about the conflictedness about that I was having. She said to me, well, he didn't choose that. It kind of was a crack in my foundation because I had known how I felt for several years at that point and had been beating myself up about it. And her saying that to me was the thing that made me realize I didn't choose this either. I had grown up as a tomboy and was really drawn to my masculinity. I was getting a lot of social pressure to be more feminine. Flirting with boys was expected, and I could not have felt more uncomfortable. There was a song that came out around that time that was like, you love me, but you don't know who I am. And I would, as cheesy as it is, I would play that song on repeat because that's just how I felt. I unfortunately hit the point where that performance started to become too much, and I thought about ending my life. That's when I made the decision to accept myself and to start to come out to some of my friends in high school. My dad found out without my knowledge. Him bringing this conversation up was all of my worst fears since I realized what was going on when I was 12. In hindsight, I don't know that was entirely fair when we're so afraid. It's hard to see those situations clearly. I don't think he even had a minute to understand what I was going through. So our conversation was not one of acceptance, but not the worst one either. He still told me that he loved me and wanted to help me work through it. It's kind of where we ended.
On my very first day of college, my parents sat me down and they said, Travis, we're making major sacrifices for you to make a better life for yourself. And I said, of course, I'm gonna get a good job and make some money and it'll be fine. And they said, no, you make a living by what you get, but you make a life by what you give. When my name was announced as the Grand Marshal for the 2022 Houston Pride Parade, I was in shock. I think I said that night that I'm not supposed to be here. Look, I'm the grandson of sharecroppers from Mississippi and the great-grandson of slaves who worked on plantations in the river parishes of Louisiana. I'm a testament of what can happen if you hope, believe, and work hard. I'm a lawyer who's Ivy League educated, who works in, of all industries, the energy sector, right? But I'm gay. I'm Black, I'm queer, and I'm proud to be here, and I couldn't be more proud that night. These 4 words are just as important to me as winning this tonight. Back to you, Deborah. My mom was a school teacher. She grew up in Gramercy, Louisiana. She graduated in 3 years from Southern University instead of 4 because her family was so poor and they needed her to work. My dad was a truck driver and he worked around the clock, and they did it all so that I could have opportunities in life that they never did. I, of course, wanted to be sort of popular. So I was student body president of every school that I attended through high school. I played tuba in the band, and I went on to be the first Black valedictorian in the history of my high school, but loved growing up in Kenner, Louisiana, and eventually knew that I needed to set my sights on other places. So education has always been important to my family. In fact, the story about valedictorians in my family, my mom was the valedictorian of her high school class, and 10 years before, my aunt was also the valedictorian of her high school class. So they really wanted someone to follow in that tradition. So I would study like nobody's business. One of the saddest experiences that I've ever had in my life was losing my mom. I was a junior at Tulane. My mom told me that she was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and 3 months later, on Christmas Day of my junior year, before I could finish finals, my mom was gone. And in that moment, I had to grow up tremendously. I was really a mama's boy, and my mom was my best friend. And so I had to start all over again. And it was, I think that for people around me, they were really worried about whether I was gonna finish college, whether I was gonna continue on the path that I was going. And for a long time, I didn't know what I was gonna do or what I was capable of doing. So I came out to my family and the vast majority of my friends when I was about a fifth-year associate working here in Houston in a major law firm. Coming out for me was an issue of life or death. I remember managing pronouns so that no one would know what my sexual orientation was and saying that I was with her instead of him. Not going to certain social events because I wouldn't be able to hide what I had done the weekend prior. And it was exhausting, it was paralyzing, and it led to me engaging in all kinds of unhealthy behaviors, such that if I had not come out when I did, I'm not sure that I'd be here to sit here and talk to you today. I remember slowly telling some of my closest friends that I was gay, and they were so supportive and so affirming, and it gave me the courage to tell more people. And I thought that the next person that I needed to tell had to be my dad. So I called my dad on my cell phone, and I said, I've got something to tell you that you probably have figured out by now. Maybe you've known for much longer than I think that you've known, or maybe you have no clue, but I'm gay. And the phone went silent. And it went silent for so long that I thought he had hung up on me. He didn't hang up, he was crying is what I later learned. And the first words out of his mouth after that long pause was, I love you, I've always loved you, you will always be my son. And we've hit hiccups since I came out, but he said the right thing at the right time, and he has always been there for me, and he's always loved me. When I think about the tears that my dad was crying, he wasn't crying because he was sad that he had a gay son. When we later talked about it, my dad told me that if you're gonna be a black man in today's society, you've already got strikes against you. But if you're gay, if that's who you're gonna be, you better be ready to be stronger than you ever imagined. And that's why my dad was crying, because he knew the adversity that I could potentially face by being a black gay man in corporate America and in society at large.
As a cisgender heterosexual woman, for some reason, like, the Montrose area still always spoke to me. I think it was my little piece of New York. From the time that I was independent of my parents' home and not living someplace else, I wanted to live in Montrose. And part of that, living in Montrose and living very close to Westheimer, was to be engulfed every June by all the Pride events. I can't imagine like Montrose in my 20s and early 30s not being about Pride. It embodies part of my Houston experience. And so when I got the call that I was up for consideration, and I just started crying, I was like, what? To think that people see me as part of that liberation, as someone who brings value and joy to Pride, to Houston, like that is, it's priceless.
Ally Grand Marshal winner is Danielle Houston.
Hearing my name called as Houston Grand Marshal was such a great honor. I couldn't even believe it. I got up stage, my hands are shaking. I had my speech in my hand.
I started my career in HIV September 15, 2008.
I'm not a person living with HIV, and I came to the HIV space in an academic sense. Like, I had a background in infectious diseases and virology, and from the Center for AIDS, like, I learned activism, and I learned the impact of the epidemic on people and communities. And it spoke to everything in my life. It was anti-racism work, it was civil rights, it was equal rights, it was LGBT advocacy and activism and allyship, and it's a great responsibility. I hope like that kind of energy and spirit and happiness helps kind of destigmatize and kind of break some of the myths and mythology that's kind of been around the epidemic. In the movement, we are praising people's resilience, their ability to bounce back, to keep going time after time after time. And yet very rarely, when we talk about resilient people, do we look at the systems that cause them to be resilient, that continue to oppress them. Ally, advocate, activist, all those types of things, you have to stand up.
It isn't like it was when I moved here 45 years ago. 45 years ago, I really watched myself really carefully. But it's still there. The hatred's still there with some people.
From 1988 to 1993, gay bashings increased by 172%.
Nancy Rodriguez lost her 27-year-old son, an investment banker, because a gang of young men hated him for being gay. He died outside a Montrose nightclub July 4th.
And the Klan decided to march from here, from this area right here, down to Lower Westheimer. The community was very alarmed by that.
I was asked several times when I was mayor of Houston if I was ever intimidated politically. But the difference was I was a lesbian activist in the 70s. No, I was never intimidated as mayor, but I do still carry the scars from what I experienced growing up in a certain era and with a certain mindset in a very different time. And it's very wearing.
1 in 5 of us will experience a hate crime in our lives. Imagine I'm getting attacked, and then in court, the criminal defendant says, well, I freaked out because I found out that Travis was gay, and that's why I attacked them. In many states, that's a viable defense.
It is not lost on me that when I worked at the Texas legislature, when I was one of the only out staffers, I got called by representatives to my face, by other staff members to my face. A faggot, a dyke, we're not gonna listen to her. You're the reason why we're writing these laws. And I always had to question, is me being here more helpful or harmful? Here I am thinking I'm fighting, I'm advocating, I'm being out and proud, but am I here, is that what's eliciting their hate? And I have to remind myself, it's the opposite. It's that people are working so hard to take away from queer communities that there has to be someone who has the privilege and resources to stand up and hold the line. For everything I've been doing with the LGBT community, to be one of the first out LGBT county officials to now being recognized by your home city, it's a very fun feeling. It's a very cool feeling to see it come full circle. I don't think it'll really set in until Pride Night when we're in that parade and seeing everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
When I came out, I had been in high school at St. Agnes here in town, and there was a group of us in sports that had all kind of come out together, but I was the last one. So I went to college. My first year in college, I sat one of my best friends down. He thought that night I was going to ask him to go out with me. And he said it wasn't happening. And I actually came out to him and said, no chance at all. But that was a very fun moment. Again, for me, I had come out to friends. I had that community in college. I was very fortunate, even in Texas. And this is a time when, even me being 18, there's a time where people were being murdered in Texas still, young people like myself, that it was still a risk to come out, but I had the privilege to do so. I remember coming back home to my family shortly after, and I told my parents, and my dad said, I'm okay with it, but don't tell our Mexican family. And I didn't come out to my Mexican family until maybe 5 years ago, when I said, listen, at this point, I'm 28. If I'm not gonna do it now, it's never gonna happen. But there is this interesting cultural respect, though. I was out in my professional life. We all pretended I wasn't out at home. And so it was interesting to finally say, this is absurd, right? I am advocating for LGBTQ rights, and I can't even come out to my family. But I was always fortunate to have my friends, to have that circle, and even to have that professional circle. I got to be free everywhere except for home.
The daytime parade was tough.
We had the parade in June for many years. Some of our other cities across the South shifted to fall parades. We in Houston wanted to keep it during June, the traditional Pride Month.
It was in the middle of the afternoon, and people were just drenched. I can remember the drag queens who, by the time they got to the end of the parade route, you know, their makeup was just literally melting off their faces.
So 1997 was the first night parade, and it really sort of put us on the map of making this a little neighborhood parade to making this one of the largest parades in the city and one of the, largest parades among peer cities.
It got bigger and bigger, but it also, Montrose is an older neighborhood with narrow streets. How do you take one of the largest parades in Houston, the only really large parade that wasn't in downtown, and make it safer? Well, the way to do that is to move it downtown with the broader streets.
The reason why I plan or I am involved in Pride Houston and the board and bring on this event is because representation matters. You need to see yourself on a stage that's bigger than yourself so you can aspire to the highest version of yourself.
I'm from New Orleans, so I expected something like Mardi Gras, but what I got was completely different. I saw people really celebrating who they are, where our movement is going, and also reflecting on where we've been.
Attending my first Pride Parade as a queer Black woman was an important moment for me because that was a moment where I actually wanted to celebrate my intersectionality, especially back here at home in Houston.
The joy and rhythm of moving together in the streets, that's a beat, right? That's a rhythm, that's a soul movement. I've been looking forward to seeing Pride Houston in life and living color for so long. Visibility and language is so important in our journey. I had heard the phrase non-binary since undergrad at least, but I didn't know what it meant exactly. Like, I knew what the definition was, I just didn't know how it played out in someone's life. Finally, I met some non-binary folks and I was like, oh, okay. This gender thing that I've been experiencing my whole life, that's what this is. That process in particular was where I started to rethink some of the ways that I did advocacy work. I've been focused on mentoring individuals a lot up until that point. And then while I was at UNC Greensboro was when I came out as non-binary. I did start to take a look around at the system a little bit more as I came out. I noticed that I was the only out trans person in my department, and I looked a little farther and I was the only trans person in my division at the professional level. I was starting to get ready for the next step in my career and was discovering that that step wasn't evolving for me. So I wanted to start to explore how I could make greater change. That was kind of the start of me wanting to pivot my career to specifically working on LGBTQ issues and supporting LGBTQ students directly. I met my partner in 2019. She's doing her PhD program in curriculum and instruction at the University of Houston, and right after she got accepted, the pandemic started. I was already starting to gear up to think about what my next steps would be. And this position opened up at the exact time that we were getting ready to make our move. My position at the University of Houston is the Gender and Sexuality Education Program Manager. Stepping into a place of so much like LGBTQ support and legacy was really emotional and powerful and very healing for me to go from a place where I had felt a little bit alone at times to then be in a place where I was surrounded by a lot of support and intentional action was really great.
While you are in law school, in the summers in between your first and your second and your third year of law school, you have the opportunity to work. I was fortunate enough to get jobs at 3 different law firms in the Houston area. So that's what really sold me on coming to Houston. I think Houston's the best economic deal for lawyers because you get a very sophisticated legal practice in a city that's somewhere in the South with a great cost of living, great diversity of people, good food, good music, and my dad and I make a much better father-son team with me being in Houston and him being in New Orleans. The law allowed me to get out into the community and to serve on nonprofit boards and to really work in the community with my newfound skills. So on the one hand, I was developing skills at work, but on the other, I was able to give back to the community. And as much as I have given to the community, I feel like the lucky one. I've gotten back so much more than any of those organizations or the beneficiaries of those organizations. When I think back to the little kid in New Orleans who never imagined for a second telling any of my family members I was gay, never imagined telling any of my friends I was gay, and definitely, as I moved through life, never imagined telling any of my coworkers. And today, I stand before you as the 2022 male-identifying Grand Marshal of Pride. I have come such a long way, and the reason why it's important for me to tell my story is because if there's one person who hears it, who decides it's okay to live their true and authentic lives, my story's worth telling.
What I would say to my 12-year-old self is it may feel like you are alone, but you aren't. And there is a lot of love and care and compassion, even where you're not sure that you see it. I would encourage myself to be kinder to myself, and because that self-kindness opens up kindness to others as well.
This is the house where the first Diana party was held. In 1953, here in Houston, the Dianas started. This was the first organization that actually began to coalesce, and every year they did something. And finally, I found out that the Dianas are the oldest continually active gay organization in the country, which seems amazing. You'd think it'd be New York, you'd think it would be San Francisco. Actually, Houston can claim that prize. Over the last 14 years, I've written 16 cover stories for Outsmart. This is an Outsmart magazine from 2008, and this was the first cover story that I wrote. After 45 years of working in this community, to be riding down the street in a Jeep in a parade is going to be very exhilarating, and it's a big honor. I'm very touched and very honored that that's been given to me. Oh, thank you, Bella.
Where are you? I'm back. Where's Melanie? Melanie. Congratulations.
You earned it.
You're the star.
We have everybody checked in from the Grand Marshal tent. So y'all were all chilling in VIP, right? It is a tremendous effort. Thousands of volunteers, months of planning, and intricate details.
Hold the marshals, please. Okay.
At the beginning of every parade, before the parade started, I would walk around to all the units and floats and thank them for being in the parade. Tell them that there'll probably be protesters, just ignore them, we're not going to change their mind.
This is the day that many gay men and lesbians who have been dealing with who they are come out of the closet to themselves, and maybe through your television to their mothers and fathers and employers, and they just deal with that.
And I got to tell you, the first year the fire department and the first year the police department showed up in the parade as an entry, people just got up and screamed. I mean, for so many years, we couldn't even be considered to be a police person, but that was over our shoulders.
Houston Pride 2022! Houston Pride!
The beat goes on. I think for me in the HIV space, it reminds me of the heartbeats that have stopped and the heartbeats that are still going. And as long as there's a heartbeat, there should still be a movement. I think the beat goes on is about whatever movement you're in.
I am feeling so good to be a Houstonian right now, and I can't believe I have been on this journey to being Grand Marshal for over 4 months now. So it's been a quarter of a year, and today is finally the day, and we're gonna celebrate.
It means that we are gonna be dancing in the street. You can't miss the part about the beat, right? And for me, beat connotes music.
The energy is through the roof.
You have the DJ on stage, you have the lights, you have the grandstand, you have all the people cheering. It really is a celebration of the whole city.
Growing up in Montrose, my parents always had, gay and lesbian and queer friends. There was never a question if it was okay to be gay within my circle. And I think maybe that was the shock in my life, is growing up into a world where for some people it wasn't okay. And you just have to ask yourself, did they ever go to Pride? Did they see there's hundreds of people? Do they really know? Have they ever experienced this joy? There's two distinct moments in my life where I realized I was drawn to public service. One, when I was in school, I was studying medicine. And I remember in sociology, when you're wondering or when you're learning how to organize in a group, the power of community to come together and affect change on a global scale. I remember thinking, as a doctor, I can save maybe one life at a time if I'm lucky. As a sociologist, I have the ability to influence thousands of lives for the greater good. So it's that seed then that I took into public service and knew that I wanted to be part of system-wide change. Who goes in the world with a sociology degree? Me. I happened to start checking the mail for a House representative. And this was ahead of the 2011 legislature, Jessica Farrar. And she said, "You're so good at checking the mail, why don't you come do it at the legislature?" And I thought, okay, we'll see what this government thing is all about. Out of maybe 1,000 staff members in that building, I was only one of 5 that was out, and definitely the only lesbian that was out. And I knew that I had to take the courage of being gay, the privilege of having a family that would support me and love me no matter what, and the privilege of being in an office that would support me no matter what. And I had to stay and make those folks talk to me. That if they were gonna pass laws saying they were anti-gay, they were gonna have to look me in the face every time they did it, on the House floor and on the Senate floor, standing right next to them. And I knew that I couldn't live the rest of my life without taking that privilege of having that support at home to be out and gay for the folks who couldn't anywhere else in Texas. At my heart of hearts, I'm a Houston nerd. I love Houston with all my heart. Anything I can that leaves Houston a better place than when I leave it has my whole heart.
The community can be an ally by raising awareness of the issues that plague the LGBTQ community.
When I hear ally, I really feel like it's support. It is an advocate. It's someone who shows up, who understands that their voice is not first. I think that allyship requires me to use my voice when I'm in rooms in which people don't have privilege. It's all of those things because, they say like an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. My job is not to speak for anybody, it's to amplify other people's voices in a space.
I think one of the special things that I've seen in Houston is that folks have a lot of compassion and empathy. So even when I meet folks who don't understand necessarily, there's this suspension of disbelief to just be curious. I love the curiosity because that curiosity opens up the opportunity for us to have a conversation.
Be you and fight for you no matter what. We're gonna keep fighting for the values we believe in equity, in social justice, no matter if it makes other people feel uncomfortable.
I've experienced homophobia in the Black community, and I've also experienced racism in the gay community. And we've got to change that. We've got to stop that.
I hope someday we don't need to have a parade. I really hope so, that we would be accepted. But we still need it. There are still people living, young kids living, that don't have a connection to what the community is about. So the battle isn't over. We got to continue on it. The parade isn't the battle, but the parade helps get our spirits up to do the battle.
I want the kids to know they're not alone, that they have support, that they are, and I want them to know this, that they are absolutely divinely beautiful just as they are, that God made them perfect. And if people don't see that, they're not evolved, those people.
The only reason that gays were able to make the advances that they did was because people came out. At the end of the day, that's what changes people's hearts and minds.
Why do you need gay pride? It is a celebration, but it's also an affirmation. And when you consider the abuse many of us had to go through, the difficulties of coming out and navigating our families, the real fears, we're still here, we're still queer, we're gonna do it again, and we're fabulous.
I'll never miss this chance. Make it dance. 해가 뜨는 것도 모르게. Dance, time to dance. 집에 가는